Health Minister speaking a little earlier, and I'm joined now by clinical virologist Dr Bonolo Mashishi. Doc, thanks so much for joining us. So we've got the Health Minister explaining that humans can get avian flu if they're in contact with poultry. I suppose the big question, though, is have there been any cases of any strains of avian flu passing from human to human?
Good evening, Sally, to you and your audience. Thank you for having me on the show tonight. Certainly, as the Minister has highlighted, although it rarely happens, there is that risk and possibility of having avian influenza or bird flu spreading into humans. And the cases that have been reported globally and worldwide are quite rare, so it still remains low in terms of the number of cases that have been reported, and it still remains a rare phenomenon, but certainly the risk still exists.
Yeah. So have there been any cases of someone with bird flu passing it on to another human being with bird flu, or are all the cases linked to direct contact with poultry?
So just to take it a little bit back, Sally, regarding bird flu and how it usually spreads. So bird flu, when we're speaking about bird flu, we're talking about certain types of influenza viruses that are normally existing in aquatic wild aquatic birds, and oftentimes they spread from these birds, obviously, to poultry, other bird species, and animals. And in this circle of an ecosystem, if I can call it that, humans always exist at the crossfire. So oftentimes that's the normal spread from animals or birds to humans. Very rarely does it spread from human to human. Usually that may be associated with occupational exposure to somebody who's not really protected in that instance, and somebody who's symptomatic.
Have we had any human cases here in South Africa with this latest outbreak, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no, but as the Minister also highlighted, this is a situation that's obviously evolving and closely monitored by authorities. So should individuals develop symptoms, they are urged then to report promptly.
There is... The US Center for Disease Control has been quoted as saying that avian flu is actually on the rise globally. Just recently, also a man up in Cambodia died from the H5N1 strain. So just how dangerous is it to catch avian flu?
It certainly is. These strains, Sally, have been monitored for a while now, and they form part of ongoing surveillance programs, given the risk that exists to humans and the pandemic potential that exists. So the case in Cambodia is not unique. There have been cases elsewhere in the world reported, and it is concerning that we're getting, an increased number of these cases globally. And again, there is that concern for pandemic potential for these avian strains into humans.
So talk to me about the different strains, because one of the people I've spoken to about the avian flu, we've heard of the H5N1, but then there's also an H7 version that apparently, if my memory serves me correctly, spreads differently in that the birds for 5 days, they don't seem to have it, and then they start sickening at that point. Whereas with the earlier versions, they died very quickly. So in other words, a bird is contagious for longer, hence why it spreads. Also talk that it basically spreads in the wind. Are we seeing new, more severe strains of avian flu?
So as I mentioned earlier, Sally, these avian strains form part of a group referred to as type A influenza viruses. Now, these type A influenza viruses can be further subdivided into different strains based on the proteins that exist on the surface of the virus. And the nomenclature we use, or the naming system that we use, is usually an H combined with an N. So as you said, H5N1. And further, with this classification system that we use, we usually look and characterize at the infection, the severity of infection and disease, and the rate at which birds die following infection with these viruses. And we refer to that as either highly pathogenic or low pathogenic influenza viruses. So you can have different strains of these influenza viruses causing either low pathogenic or high pathogenic influenza infections in the birds. But, you know, in the previous outbreaks, we certainly have been seeing a lot of low pathogen or low pathogenic influenza A strains. But regardless of the pathogenicity in the birds or, you know, avian species, in humans, it does cause potential for severe disease.
So if it's possible then through contact with birds to get avian flu, why is it safe to eat the meat of, or, I mean, is it safe to eat the meat of birds that have had avian flu, or eat the eggs of birds that have avian flu?
So in most cases of reported human cases contracting avian influenza viruses, it's often associated with, number one, close contact, number two, it has to be prolonged contact, and number three, it's often individuals who remain unprotected. So there's often a risk potentially associated with occupational risk. That's been mainly the main sort of route of transmission into human occupational bird markets, etc. But certainly there is no evidence to suggest that it can be spread through food. And I must emphasize here, Sally, that the food must be cooked properly through and through. So there has been no, you know, reported cases through cooked food, properly handled, safe food handling, you know, either of eggs or any of the poultry meat products.
And just finally, to return to something I was chatting with you about a little earlier, the real issue is when it jumps from human to human, which is exactly what happened with COVID. And that's when it can spread through the human population. What determines that spread from human to human?
So there are a number of factors, and we group them basically into virus-specific factors, environmental factors, and of course human-related factors. So you need to create almost like the perfect brew to allow for that situation to exist. So when we speak about the viral factors, it's obviously related to how the virus actually adapts to humans over a prolonged period of time, or over a certain, it doesn't necessarily have to be a prolonged period of time, but over a defined period of time. And this can be short or long, as we've seen perhaps with COVID. And with the host, or rather human-related factors, things like being in contact, close contact, you know, and this is not unique to COVID and avian influenza. A lot of viruses we see kind of take advantage of how humans interact with the environment, human encroaching into spaces where animals exist. And of course, we cannot miss the big conversation about, you know, climate change and the climate crisis that we face. That on its own creates an environment that really...
I got you. I just want a point of clarity. Let's say I have a friend who's a farmer and they get avian flu. Must I stay away from them because there could be a risk I could catch their avian flu or not?
Certainly we would advise that the individuals who are exposed and develop symptoms seek medical treatment promptly.
Sure.
The risk may exist, and all necessary precautions must be taken into account.
All right, so a low risk, but it's absolutely something we can't rule out. Thank you so very much. Clinical virologist Dr Bonolo Mashishi there, talking to us about avian flu and what viruses do. and how they move around and change their nature. Now, still to come on SA tonight.